Good morning, everyone. We are here with you today. I am Alina Ivana de Vos. I'm part of the valorization ecosystem in DG Research and Innovation. Today, in partnership with the experts from the IP Helpdesk, we are continuing our webinar series with a session dedicated on Artificial Intelligence Act. Additionally, we invite you to join us for our upcoming webinar on the topic of publishing and patenting. The date for this session will be communicated shortly and, of course, well in advance for you to save the date. Next slide. Great. So I will give you a bit of overview on the Horizon SaaS platform as usual. With the support of our partners, we are facilitating innovators access to services and various opportunities, including matchmaking and brokerage activities. For instance, I'm going to take as an example the one from Enterprise Europe Network and Axio Barcelona. What we are doing with them, they are running an open innovation challenges, and we are making sure that companies with corporates and companies across various sectors. The platform also offers investors and corporate pitching events, as well as dedicated webinars. Of course, the topics that we chose are based on the needs and target audience as stated on the Horizon SaaS platform by the EU R&I beneficiaries. We have provided until now from January, for instance, funding done right for startups, and that was with Business Angel Europe. We have business modeling and also working with business angels. These are topics of your interest, depending on the technology readiness level, but for sure, it addresses a wide range of TRL levels. Additionally, and I think it is important to mention, we offer also free go-to-market support services, which are available to EU-funded beneficiaries, covering everything: dissemination, exploitation planning, business planning, and scaling up. These are free of charge. There is a service provider booster that can, of course, accommodate your needs based on where you are with your business. Next slide. All right. One of the initiatives that we are pleasantly surprised to see also last time got a bit of attraction. Great to remind you about the Empowering SMEs, Startups and SMEs, which covers travel and accommodation costs for SMEs participating in live pitching and brokerage events. Here, I would like to thank you very much. We had received lots of emails from you. I'd like to clarify, first of all, this initiative is targeting and designed for EU beneficiaries. It is very important to know who the target audience is, and it's focusing mostly on providing access to selected events. Either you choose the events, either we choose the events, depending on your business needs. It's rather than organizing them. We designed this initiative to send beneficiaries, SMEs and startups to events for covering travel and accommodation, and we do not organize ourselves event in this regard. Nevertheless, because we received so much interest from your side, we took note of all your suggestions, which are great, and definitely will take them into account for future initiatives. Another important aspect to mention, the deadline. It is 18th of June. What does it mean? It means that all events and reimbursements must take place before then. Of course, furthermore, we'll communicate whether a similar initiative will be available and what will change from the existing one. So please keep in mind, 18th of June, all events and reimbursement must be committed prior to that date. Next slide. Great. Now, Horizon is SaaS platform TV, as it sounds, a TV. Until now, I have proposed to you audiovisual material, but we are coming now with something more out of the box for the platform, which is a podcast. Of course, you are already aware of the podcast. Probably you are listening to it quite frequently. We are proposing to you to share also insights on how R&I innovators are navigating the changing and challenging go-to-market journey. The series feature mostly key players in the R&I ecosystem, offering valuable insights from experts on transitioning from the lab to market. We already had our first episode with Dr. Peter Baumann, founder and CEO of Razdaman. And what is very interesting about our first podcast is that he's sharing how his company revolutionized actionable data cubes. Might not mean a lot, it's quite technical, the data cubes term, but I want you to know that it is a technology that is now adopted by major players such as NASA, Airbus, and NATO. So I think it's very interesting. It's a short, it's a data peel, it's really a couple of minutes. Tune in because we are really very excited of the outcome. The next slide. Perfect. Now, training. We are very happy. We are already in March and ready to dive into IP and Artificial Intelligence Act. We are pleased to highlight some of upcoming webinars. As you can see on the slide, you can rewatch the first webinar of the year, and we will ensure that all dates are shared with you well in advance. You can save the date in your agenda for topics that interest you the most based on your business activity, of course. And the last slide. All right, as always, we are sharing with you our contact details. Of course, you also have the contact details of the IP team. Please feel free to reach us out. Any questions, suggestions, ideas, we take them on board. We appreciate your interest, your involvement, your question, anything you send us. We acted on it, and definitely we keep them in the back of our mind to define future initiatives. It helps us definitely to shape the future of the initiatives and better plan how to address your business needs and how actually to reach your target audience, right? That was from my side. I hope it was useful for you. And if it's something I did not mention clear, please reach us out. Michele, Robert, please, I give you the floor and looking forward for the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alina. And of course, it's a pleasure for the European IP Helpdesk to keep on the well-started collaboration with the Horizon Results platform. And of course, with the team is always a pleasure to work. Now, to all participants of today's webinar, please let me also welcome you from the side of the European IP Helpdesk and take another couple of minutes to introduce the services of the help desk and also the rules of the housekeeping of today's webinar. You might have noticed that your microphone has been turned off, and that's because we want to allow our speaker to speak with the highest level of quiet as possible, so that he can share information with us without impediments, and therefore your microphone is muted, but you're very welcome to ask questions. You can do that by the question screen that you have on the right-hand side. You can see there's going to be a rectangular icon with a question mark inside. If you type your questions in there, we're going to gather them all the questions, and we are then, of course, doing our best at the end of the webinar to answer to all these questions. Also, the question that we most frequently receive is, when are you going to be receiving the slides and the recording of today's webinar? That's going to happen this afternoon. You will receive a follow-up email that will allow you to have access to the different information that we will be sending you. Among these information, there's going to be the PDF slides of the slides of the presentation we are about to see, as well as a link that will allow you to watch the webinar anytime you'd like. You can also distribute this information to your network without any form of limitation. We're happy if you do that. Also, yeah, you can watch our webinars, as Alina said before, not only the one that has already taken place, but all the webinars of all the semester. So just check the e-learning page when you will receive the follow-up email, and you're going to have a lot to watch if you have some spare time to spend on our website. Very briefly regarding the European IP Helpdesk, I don't want to take much of your time. Basically, we are a service initiative that has the objective of helping small and medium enterprises, researchers, and beneficiaries of EU-funded projects understanding and using intellectual property and intellectual property rights. We're founded publicly by the European Commission, and we help the three categories that I mentioned before, as often as possible, they are the ones who contact us the most, but also all physical and juridical persons who might have a simple question regarding intellectual property right through the services that you can see here in the small clouds on the right-hand side of the screen. So through the website, you can have access to trainings, to publications. You can see who are our ambassadors, part as well of the EEN that was mentioned before by Alina. They're also present at awareness raising event, and probably most interesting and most importantly, we have a helpline that answers within 3 working days to any question that you ask in English, preferably, and they are there exactly to give you this first line support, which is free of charge, like every other service that could prevent you potentially from making costly mistake at the beginning of your intellectual property journey, for example. We are embedded in the website ec.europa.eu/ip-helpdesk. We're embedded there with our siblings that offer the very same services that have been introduced to you before, but with different territorial areas like China, India, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So if companies are in need or they wish to expand in those countries and need more information regarding the IP systems there, our siblings are there exactly to provide these kind of information. But this also means that our territorial coverage is limited to the European Union plus the horizon-related countries, like, for example, the United Kingdom, or Norway, or Switzerland, or Turkey, and so on and so forth. The information you can find online is large. We have gathered and created many fact sheets and many uh, guides throughout and bulletins throughout the years. So we have e-learning modules, we have guides and fact sheets that are topic, country, and sector specific. There are infographics. There are case studies that have been developed with European agencies and also with the European Patent Office. So you can see and find a lot for on different topics if you would like to read and learn online. But if you instead prefer a more interactive learning method like the webinars like we're doing today, you can visit our website and you will see all the webinars coming up now until mid-April, but they're going to go on until June. And soon we will also have publishing versus patenting already available there. And the ones that I have left here that were at the beginning of March are there for a specific purpose in order to show you that even the webinars that have already taken place can be followed again through our e-learning page. So if you visit that, you're going to be finding those webinars that have already taken place and you can watch them again. Our contacts, as Alina was saying, we're very happy to have a dialogue with our audience. So if you write to us, we will answer within 3 working days. If you have a specific question, you can write to the helpline. If you would like to retrieve one of the training, you can write to training@iphelpdesk.eu. We are also active on X and LinkedIn. And if you would like us to inform you regarding the upcoming activities in which we are involved, you can gladly subscribe to our newsletter in order not to miss any of the relevant information that we are going to be sharing in the nearest future. With this, I'm going to end the, let's call it, administrative part of the webinar today, and I'm going to pass the word to our speaker, Dr. Robert Harrison. I hope I kept the right uh, the right account because I see two at the moment, Robert, but I gave you the right.
Yes,
I hope
yes,
it's
it's
right.
all right. You have given me the right
Wonderful.
screen. Let me just try, and unfortunately, we're having a slight problem here today because of WhatsApp has updated. Sorry, not WhatsApp, because the system updated itself on my computer this morning. So I hope you're seeing it in not yet in presentation mode, but I hope you are now seeing the screen properly. And if I put it
Yes,
like that,
yeah.
you should be seeing everything in presentation mode. Is that correct?
1 second. I still
Are
see
you?
it. Yes, yes, perfect.
Yes. Okay, fine. Thanks very much indeed. It's a great pleasure actually to be here today to talk about the European AI Act and some of the other regulations behind it. Um, we're not going to do much about intellectual property today. There is another webinar, I think on the 9th of April, which I'm sure Michael will tell you about later on, which will go into a lot more detail about the intellectual property. But the purpose of today's session is to talk, what do we actually mean by the AI Act? What are the main objectives? What is this so-called risk classification? How the AI Act, the European Union's AI Act, is intended to actually foster innovation, and there's some really important things that you need to think about. Sorry, for some reason I've got a, I don't know. So it's really talking about, we're going to talk a bit about intellectual property, some of the global implications of the AI Act, and we'll also be talking a little bit about some of the criticisms of the AI Act that have actually appeared over the past few months. So what I want you to think about is this case study that I'm presenting here. Obviously, you can see that I've generated this picture by artificial intelligence. Thank you very much indeed. This was done by ChatGPT. And let us suppose that we're trying to buy a pair of running shoes, a pair of sneakers, maybe because we're a great runner or just we want them for casual wear. And we've got a list of our favorite brands. I think you can see a Nike swoosh here. You might prefer Adidas shoes, whatever you want. Could you use an artificial intelligence system to suggest the right type of shoes? For example, you'll say, I really want to buy a pair of Nikes, which is suitable for cross-country running. Would this system be legal or not? That's a really interesting question, because if you think about the system, so shoes, well, we've got databases with lots of shoe data in it. We can probably find out what brands of shoes are suitable for what type of activities. But of course, suddenly I'm analyzing a person. I'm really getting real details about a person, about their individual choices, about how they run, how they walk, what they look like, how tall they are, the size of their feet. Am I actually able to do that legally? Well, the good news is, yes, you can do it legally. The bad news is you can't just capture all of this data that you want, put it into an artificial intelligence machine, and hope to get the results. You're really going to have to start thinking about asking the person concerned whether they agree with this. But let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Let's look about the European AI Act, what it actually means, and what it is going to mean in the future. Basically, it is a law that has been passed by the European Union and by the European Parliament, and also what's called the European Council. For some reason, I'm getting a second, so I've just got to try and, I'm having problems with my computer this today, and I keep on getting a second voice, a loudspeaker switching itself on. So let me just turn that off. I apologize for that. It was passed by the European Commission, the European Parliament, and what's called the Council of Ministers. So all of the member states of the European Union have agreed that this is the way to go forward. But it's not just the European Union laws. What's got to happen is there's got to be implementation in all of the different countries. For example, the German, everybody's got to do it by August 2026. The Germans have not really started doing it. The French Senate has already started approving the law, but it's got to go to the National Assembly. And other countries are also still thinking about how they interpret these laws and put them into their national legislature. Its aim is to basically create a human-centered, a trustworthy AI system, and also to think about the risks that are actually associated with the AI systems. We've all heard about possible risks, artificial intelligence wars, drones that can actually target, for example, individual people, individual buildings. But also artificial intelligence is helping us. I'm sure I'm not the first person who's actually used ChatGPT or Gemini to actually help me in my day-to-day work. And we know that there's a growing use of AI technologies in daily life, in business, and increasingly in politics. But of course, there's a massive potential for misuse or unintended harm. There's cases now where AI systems are being so-called poisoned by people feeding in corrupt data. There's an article, for example, talking about the Ukrainian war and how that the artificial intelligence systems are being fed with information coming out of Russia, which is slightly different or massively different than that was being fed by the Europeans or by the Americans. And that is a concern that we're going to have to live with, the potential for misuse and for unintended harm. And so what the AI Act in Europe is trying to do is to balance innovation, because we want to have innovation, with ethical responsibilities. And we also need to think about it as part of the European Union's single digital market. We talked about the digital decade 5 years ago when the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was first elected. She really wanted to push the European Union forward, digitalize everything. So we all know about the GDPR. Those of you who are involved in health services will also know about the medical device regulation, and there are other laws, the EU Data Act, the EU Governance Act. I can't go into everything today because there is so much more important things to talk about in the AI Act. The most important thing about the AI Act, at least the European laws, is that they are designed to respect fundamental rights and fundamental values of European citizens. And that's not just supposed to be empty words, that is really supposed to be the main thrust of the AI Act, and to ensure that citizens throughout the European Union really start trusting the AI services. We all have heard stories about how computers get things wrong, how individuals have been disadvantaged because of a computer-aided decision. And the idea is with these AI systems, with the AI Act, is that we have mechanisms to try and combat that. Because if an AI system is not accepted by European citizens, then it will not be used by European citizens. The other important thing is we want to prevent market fragmentation so that an AI system that is developed in France can be used in Germany. An AI system developed in Finland can be used in Portugal, language aside, because there should be a single European framework. And the other thing, it covers not just European citizens. So anybody wanting to provide an AI system in Europe will also have to obey the rules and regulations of the European Union. And some of you may have also seen that the Vice President of the United States was in Munich a few months ago criticizing the regulations in Europe about the use of AI. He felt that it was unfair that the Americans' systems which were operating in Europe would be bound by European laws. And yet they're quite clear that this is the purpose of the European Commission. So we do really need to think about this and how to move forward. Now, the basic framework behind the European Union's AI Act is the so-called risk-based approach. What does that mean in practice? It means that we basically classify each of the systems according to the risk that is possibly seen associated with them. So we have unacceptable risk, systems which present potential to have significant harm. And the example that is often quoted is the so-called social scoring. Some of you may have heard about that in China, where AI systems associate a score with each and every citizen. That is going to be absolutely excluded in Europe. Then we have high-risk systems, obviously, things like artificial intelligence in medical devices. You can certainly think about that, or autonomous vehicles. We know that there have been problems in the past with non-AI systems, with regular computer systems. There have been examples of people having too much X-rays provided to them so that instead of the recommended dose. We've also heard of computers that basically direct vehicles and cause crashes. Then we have a limited risk, which will be subject to so-called transparency requirements, such as AI-generated chat content or chatbots, the photo or the drawing you saw a few minutes ago of the shoes. And then the last but not least, the minimal risk, absolutely minimal risk, where we don't need to worry too much about the risks associated with them. So let's go into this in a little bit more detail. And this is really very important. This is something that you will need to consider when you are developing an AI system. What type of risk is associated with it? So, unacceptable risk. What are prohibited practices? There's a whole list of them in the AI Act, and this is what I've reproduced, basically the list in this section here. Now, I'm not going to go into the list in detail. You will be able to look at it when you get the slides. But basically, these systems, except under very special circumstances such as law enforcement, are prohibited, which means that a private company, a private citizen, should not be using any of these systems without specific authorization in Europe. So, deploying subliminal, manipulative, or deceptive techniques, biometric categorization systems, social scoring I've talked about. What about assessing the risk of an individual committing criminal offences? Okay for law enforcement, but not as a private individual. Facial recognition databases, some of you may well have heard of Clearview, which has done that illegally, scraped photographs from Facebook, from LinkedIn, and has developed these systems. Real-time biometric information, inferring emotions in workplace or in educational systems. And this law actually started on the 1st of February 2025, so a month and a half ago now. So if anybody is developing or using these AI systems, you should not be doing it any longer. And yes, I know that there are AI systems outside of Europe that are doing exactly this. But the moment they come into Europe, the moment that they are used or be the possibility of being used by European citizens, this is specifically banned, they are illegal in Europe. And there's actually massive fines, 35 million euros or 7% of global turnover could be actually adopted here. Why are we doing this? Because we want to have systems that don't compromise our privacy or privacy, that really uphold human dignity, human autonomy, and we want to avoid deep fakes, basically. So some of you are developing AI systems, some of you are involved in EU projects on AI systems. If you think you're in any of these risk categories that I'm listing here, you really need to sit down and think how you're going to move forward on that. So the next system is the so-called high-risk AI practices. Now, these start on the 1st of August 2026, at least the first category of which are used as safety components or a product covered by EU laws. So that is going to be, in particular, medical devices, autonomous vehicles, the two that are often cited. Anybody who's using an AI system in a medical device, you will have to start thinking about how to regulate it as from the 1st of August. Now, that may be 5 months away, 4.5 months now away. But if you don't get that in place now, don't think about how you're going to comply with it now, you are going to actually have to have a problem. You're going to have to take it off the market on the 1st of August or think about how you're going to adapt it. The second category, which is unfortunately called Annex 3, starts a 1.5 years' time on biometric identification, critical infrastructure, educational and vocational training, employment, access and enjoyment, law enforcement, migration, administration of justice. Got a bit more time to get those compliant with the European AI Act, but I say maybe 18 months or 17 months that you have to do it now. It's still going to require a lot of effort to do, and certainly needs to be thought about already at this stage. Now, let's talk about these high-risk systems, because they are probably the most challenging that you're going to actually face in the next few months. What you have got to put in place is a risk and quality management system. Really think about what is the risk associated with it, document it, and how you are ensuring quality. What do I mean by quality? Obviously, it's the quality of the data that's going in. It's also the quality of the results that are coming out. Have you trained that system in a manner that is acceptable in Europe? Have you used data where you know you have the rights to use the data, where you know that the results are going to be accurate? You've got data governance, transparency, accuracy, and robustness that have got to be put in place. All of this will need some form of technical documentation to demonstrate compliance. And as I say, the first set of these systems, for safety components or product covered by EU laws requiring a third-party conformity assessment, you will need to get this documentation in place by the 1st of August. You also have to keep fairly detailed records and provide information to downstream deployers. So if we go back to our medical device systems, it's not just simply adequate that you develop it in your company. You've got to provide really detailed instructions how the doctors, how the nurses, how the hospitals use your AI system. And you've got to have some form of continuous monitoring. What if something goes wrong? We all know the problem about liability. You get feedback, hopefully, you find out what went wrong. That's something you have got to put in place for your AI system. A risk assessment and continuous monitoring. Make certain that it continues to go right. What happens if your medical device system, for example, misidentifies cancer? You need to have a report going back. Why didn't it report this cancer? Get this documentation in place. Understand what happened here. Because if you don't do that, you will have a problem in the future. The other thing is, users must be informed when they are actually interacting with these AI systems. We know already chatbots. We know that sometimes we're told that these chatbots are AI generated. Sometimes we're not told that they're AI generated. Sometimes we get the impression that they are AI generated, but we're not explicitly told. You will need to have that put in place in the future. And you also need to put a label anything that has been generated by artificial intelligence in future. If you go back to my figure of that runner looking for their new sneakers, you will see I've put a little sign in there saying generated by ChatGPT by Robert Harrison. That is what you're going to have to do in future. We come to one of the issues that people have said, well, what happens if I want to use ChatGPT or Gemini to write articles to help me with my research? You don't necessarily have to put that on there, but we'll come to that in the moment. But I really want to emphasize the really important things about what you need to do with the AI system. But let's come to the next provision of the AI Act, which is opting out of data. Now, we talked about this individual who was running, who wanted to buy the sneakers, that we would actually have to get the data from them. We would actually need to have data about their height, about their age, about their running style. You need to get the consent. Now, we know that we need to do this with GDPR, so we're probably, in many cases, covered by it. But you probably need to look at your data consent forms. Do they really cover the use of the data for our training artificial intelligence systems? Many of them don't. Could you assume that this happens? Probably depends on the consent and the GDPR privacy provisions that you have got on your system. The other thing, however, is you also must make certain that the people can opt out from automated decision makings, that they can say, no, I don't want my data to be used for training. I don't want my data to be used to make any automated decisions, such as credit scoring or job applications. There are people, for example, who are actually starting to use AI systems for looking at suitability for job candidates. The classic one that you'll find when you do research on this is Meta or Facebook, who decided to put all of their job applications through an AI system to try and sort out the best candidates before they were interviewed. And what did it produce? Well, it produced a large number of white, male, young computer programmers. It didn't do anything about diversity or look at their ethnic backgrounds, try and make a diverse company. Why? Because, of course, the system had been trained on existing Facebook employees. And guess what? The majority of them were young, white, male computer programmers. And they've been successful. So the system, the AI system said, aha, this is what we will look at. Now, that sort of process in the future will require explicit consent. So, for example, if I send my CV to a company and they want to run it first through an artificial intelligence system, they've got to tell me about it. And I can say, yes, I will agree to it. Now, if I say I don't agree to it, it's quite possible I might not be interviewed. That's obviously something that you need to think about, but it's certainly something that we will need to consider in the near future about how to go on. And biometric images. Again, you've really got to consent to having your biometric image put and used for AI training systems. I said earlier on, these are very hard, if not. Now, there's very little you can do about it in some ways. And remember, governments and police and law enforcement officials have some special rights here. I'm not going to be talking about those special rights that they have. And I know that when we all apply for passports or for ID cards these days, we're always uploading a biometric image. You go to the local photographer's shop, for example, they first of all take your photograph, and then they'll often put it through a system just to check that it's going to be acceptable. That is okay as long as they then delete the image afterwards. Hopefully they do. There actually are some really interesting issues with this opportunity of opting out. And is it possible to retroactively opt out? That's a really challenging thing. So my data has already been used for training systems, and we can be pretty certain that the whole of the internet has been scraped and has been used to train at least one system. I believe OpenAI have basically done that. Can I sort of ask them to no longer use my data for training? Well, it's not as though that system that they've used basically contains all of the details about Robert Harrison, that he's a patent and trademark attorney, works in artificial intelligence. It doesn't actually do that. It sort of has synthesized all of this data together. So yes, I suppose you can ask them to stop using this system for future training, but it's going to be really difficult to actually manage or to suggest that, well, the existing systems should not be used because my data was illegally taken. And what would be the effect of that? Would it mean, for example, that everything has to be stopped? Would it mean that we would have to think about how to retrain them? Do we need to retrain it every time? And we hear about all of this large amounts of energy. I say we can certainly opt out for the future to make certain that we're not used or our data is not used in the future for training the systems. But we've got a bit of a problem for the existing systems, which have been trained, possibly even illegally, as we'll come to in a moment, by by systems. But we have to accept that that is going to be there anyway. Now, there's been a couple of court cases that I want to highlight, which really help us to actually understand where we are on this system. And the District Court of Hamburg last fall, 27th of December, in fact, actually made its first decision. The first decision I know of in Europe. By the way, if anybody knows of any further decisions, then please do let me know. I know there's a lot pending out there. I'm trying to keep an eye on what they are, so do feel free to let me know also in the future if you see anything, a decision that is out there, because we're updating this AI Act course regularly. This is a new decision. This, I think, is the second time I've presented, and I'll come to another one later on, which is the first time. And this decision by the District Court in Hamburg, it's the lower court, the decision is being appealed, relates to the use of images. Now, there's in European copyright law, not in US law, but in European copyright law, there's what's called the text and data mining directive, exception, beg your pardon, which means that you can use text and data mining to train systems as long as copies are not retained and as long as the copyright owner does not exclude it. So what does this mean? It means that any text, any pictures that you put up on the internet can be used for training by non-profit organizations for research and development purposes only, unless you give explicit permission. So we have here Leon, which is a non-profit organization that created this image database for research purposes, generally for research purposes. And the photographer, Mr. Kneshka, didn't actually like that because what they'd done is they'd put a link to his images into their database. He said, and they'd used his images for training their database. And he said, no, I don't like this. I disagree with this. I said you could not do this. And the court had to look at it. And firstly, the question mark was, is this illegal, that what they were doing? Well, the court said, no, this is a non-profit organization which developed the database clearly for research purposes. Therefore, that's allowed. And Mr. Kneshka did not clearly state what that his images should not be used for training AI data. He put a statement on his website, but did not use any of the automated tools like robots.txt to do this. And therefore, the court said, Mr. Kneshka, you've got nothing against Leon. Leon won that case. By the way, that's being appealed. You can go to the upper district court in Hamburg and probably will go up to the European Court of Justice at some stage. But it certainly told us that if we have a non-profit organization developing databases for research and development purposes, then we're okay, as long as the people don't exclude it. Now, that's great for research organizations, that's great for universities, which means you can start using these data without too many problems. The issue, however, is a more serious one, which is, did other people who are commercial organizations actually use the Leon database? So the original idea was to have a research-only database. It's almost certain, I say no proof, but I think the general consensus is that actually people like Chat or OpenAI for ChatGPT, possibly Gemini, we have actually used this Leon database. You'll find information, you'll find people referencing that. I don't know is the answer, but you will find allegations that this has happened. And we all know that ChatGPT is a commercial operation. We all know Gemini, at least the premium functions, is a commercial operation. That would not be allowed under the European copyright law. So whereas Mr. Kneshka did not have a case against Leon because Leon's thrust as a non-profit was for research, the fact that that research database was then used by ChatGPT or possibly used by ChatGPT meant that that is not an allowed use. So Mr. Kneshka may have a claim against OpenAI. And that is happening increasingly, that there are a number of court cases around that, number of court cases which are looking to see, is there copyright infringement? Because what we do know is that ChatGPT or OpenAI, we know that Gemini and we know that Llama and some of the other databases, they have scraped the internet, they have used copyrighted information in order to train their data, which under European law is almost certainly not allowed. There's a slight difference in the United States, which we might come to later on, which has this concept of fair use, which to allow it. And the AI systems are certainly arguing that their use of the training data, of the copyrighted information for training purposes is fair use. We don't know this concept of fair use in Europe. Is that going to be accepted or not? That's a really interesting question, which I think we'll come to in a few minutes. So, maybe just on that, there's a big debate in the United Kingdom about that at present. So the UK, because of Brexit, did not adopt this new copyright laws that we actually have in Europe on the text and data mining, and are now trying to work out how they should do it. So we've talked about training data, we've talked about AI risks, we've talked about copyright infringement. Let's move on to generative AI. I guess almost everybody on this webinar has used at least one of these generative AI systems, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Gemini, or one of the other ones. LinkedIn has it, Copilot of Microsoft Word now has it incorporated into it. These suddenly appeared, and actually the rules in the AI Act had to be adapted very quickly in order to take into account generative AI system. It's the same risk-based approach. Obviously, these large language models that they're called are being used for many different purposes. But it is certain that you are going to have to use the same approach in order to think about how to market, how to commercialize such AI, generative AI stuff. The two most important things that you will need to think about is that if you produce anything with the AI system, you have to generate it as content generated by AI. And you have to really think about how to do it. Now, there's a slight difference. If you use the generative AI system to do research and then rewrite the article or the blog piece or your research and it's only assisting, then you don't have to label it as AI generated. But if you do have to actually, if you're just basically reproducing it one-to-one or with a few minor changes, then it will be, it has to be labeled as generated AI. The other thing that we do that you need to take into account is you must make certain that your generative AI system mitigates harmful content. So I'll give you a little story about that. For various reasons, I wanted to find out more about the manufacture of a particular drug for quite genuine reasons. So I wrote into ChatGPT, please provide a recipe for making a particular organic compound. And if I do that for something like ethanol, methanol, it will give me a recipe. For this particular drug, which is actually a banned substance, and I wasn't going to make it, I just needed it as background information for something I was working on, I then got told, I'm sorry, I'm not in liberty to tell you that information. That's exactly what we need to be able to do. If I were to write into ChatGPT, I want to know how to make, using 3D printing, a Kalashnikov or an AK-47 rifle, it will not tell me. Yes, probably if I do some searching on the internet, I will find exactly that, and I'll probably find the right program to do it so that I can certainly make a 3D printer gun or something like that, whether it's a Kalashnikov, I don't know. Yes, you can find it, but at least within the serious large language models, the serious generative AI systems, they are not going to allow you to get the information out about how to print guns, how to make banned drugs, for example. So that needs to be taken into account. Doesn't always go right, as Gemini found. I think they went through about 3 versions before they came to a system which turns out to be quite acceptable. Let's talk about the impact on innovation and AI development. What do we need to actually take into account when we're thinking about AI and innovation? Because this was the other thrust of the AI Act. The European Commission really wanted to encourage the development of AI systems in Europe, but had to work out how to do this whilst maintaining the systems, whilst ensuring that the systems are going to be safe. So they've come up with what is called regulatory super sandboxes. These are basically laboratories, virtual laboratories, where you can test out your AI system under the control or under the supervision of a regulatory authority. In Germany, it's going to be the Federal Agency for Networks. In other countries, there are different organizations that are being done. The French one, I've got the French one around here. And they're basically going to give you the opportunity to really test your system, semi-real life conditions, before you put it onto the market. They're supposed to be set up by August 2025. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. There was a conference called yesterday in Germany, for example, where the person at the ministry who's in charge of the laws said this is going to be a real challenge. Germany had an election a couple of weeks ago, a real challenge to put it through Parliament. There's not going to be much political differences about it. At the end of the day, it's a law from the EU, already decided by the EU, that needs to be put into German national legislation, needs to have this regulatory sandbox set up, needs to have local laws, which means that the Parliament probably is not going to be a big debate or anything like that. But on the other hand, they need to find time in the Bundestag, in the German Parliament, to actually decide these laws. We really want to encourage in Europe innovation that aligns with ethical principles and aligns with societal benefits, as it says in the Act. How can we improve the life for European citizens? Now, that's quite complicated. We do have a special exception, which is that AI models that are solely for research and development purposes or solely for open source, they don't need to go through a lot of these controls. But you have to be really careful. If you're doing R&D, for example, research and development, and you develop an AI tool that is something that you want to valorize, that you want to commercialize at a later stage, then it will need to adopt the AI principles of the AI Act. So it's all fine that your students, that your researchers have done sort of an R&D process and don't really need to worry so much about the AI Act. But the moment that they come to think about, well, how can we use this to bring benefit to general society, it will need to comply with the requirements of the AI Act. What does that mean for us? That means it's really very, very important that even in those R&D stages, even when you're developing an open source database, that you think about the risk level, that you think about the compliance requirements on it. Because if you don't, then you will either have to backfill everything, you'll have to do everything in the past, make certain it complies in the future, or you will not be able to put it onto the market. Now, there are going to be real challenges for businesses. Obviously, there's going to be more compliance requirements, particularly high-risk AI systems are going to have to need an awful lot of extra work that is going to be put into them. That documentation that I talked about earlier on. What about startups, SMEs developing AI technologies? We already know that startups, small SMEs are challenged with the costs, with the requirements generally of starting a business. And we're adding an extra layer on top of it. Is this going to be problematic for general competitiveness? That's something that has already been highlighted politically as an issue within Europe. Have we got too many regulations in place? US Vice President told us we had too many regulations in place a couple of weeks ago when he was at the Munich Security Conference. The United Kingdom, if you read their proposed rules for development of AI systems, will suggest that they want to have a lighter touch regulation than we have in Europe, because they believe that a lighter touch regulation with fewer rules, less compliance requirements, will help competitiveness in the European Union. On the other hand, you can look at GDPR and say, yes, we do know that GDPR is a bit of a pain in the backside. All of these rules and regulations that we actually have to think about when we're creating databases. but slowly those rules and regulations are going throughout the world. The requirement to label AI-generated content, first set out in the European AI Act, is being adopted in China, for example. That's something that is also incredibly important then this is one of the reasons for the AI Act here, because it was said we really want to establish a European centre. I keep on coming back, put the compliance systems in place, really make certain that the compliance, that you understand what you're doing and how you're going to do it in the future. So let's just go on a little to the next slide. Governance, the most important thing. How is this going to be governed? So we have a European AI board that's been set up, which is basically coordinating national authorities to ensure that there's a consistent enforcement of the AI Act. We already have a similar sort of organization for GDPR, which basically is giving opinions about certain issues that are presented to it, with the idea that we have a coordinated approach within the whole of the European Union. And this is set up by the national authorities, so it's not a private body. This has representatives from each of the 27 member states of the European Union to do it, and they're advising the EU on emerging AI risks and new regulations. And then we have the AI Office. The AI Office is part of the European Commission, and it's going to be monitoring the effective implementation and the effective compliance of the AI Act. And then, of course, we are basically going to require monitoring, and we're going to require reporting, particularly those who are developing AI Act. I've already talked about some of the reporting, some of the compliance that you need to be thinking about in the future. But let's think about global implications of the AI Act. What does this actually mean for us? So we've talked a lot about what it means in Europe. We also talked at the beginning that non-EU companies, when they are targeting EU markets or handling data from EU citizens, will have to apply this act. This is often forgotten. We don't know about the transfer of data for private data outside the European Union. There are a number of countries where the European Union has said, the laws are roughly approximate, so that's okay. For transferring data to the United States, there is an agreement between the US and the European Union. It's being challenged, by the way, in court on that one. Several versions have already been not accepted. But it does really mean that global companies will have to start thinking about working on how to implement their systems based in Europe. The idea was quite openly said by the European Union to encourage global cooperation on AI ethics and regulations. We've already seen some of the first parts of that with the OECD, but we've also seen divergences. The AI Safety Summit, for example, a couple of weeks ago in Paris, saw every single country of the European Union and many other countries around the world signing up to a code of conduct. The United States and the United Kingdom chose not to sign that. They said it was too added extra obligations. So whereas we have the EU setting standards, we also know that countries are going to diverge from it. I've talked about the United States. The interesting thing in the United States is that we have several of the federal states in the US who are already trying to adopt standards similar to what we have in Europe. Just like California has adopted a lot of very similar standards, such as the GDPR. There's differences. We have federal laws in the United States and we have state laws. So every state is starting to adopt their own various regulations on it. What about the implications for intellectual property? I'm going to talk very briefly about this because it is actually quite important. The question about authorship, the question about who creates it, who owns it, is not addressed at all in the AI Act. There is a consensus that copyright protection requires a human author. So if you use an AI system to assist your development of your text, of your image, then that is acceptable. And there's actually a case in the United States. Okay, it's not part of the European Union, I know, but it's the only case that I know of at present where a programmer used an AI system to generate an image, and he combined various images together in order to produce a composite image and claim copyright in that. And the US Copyright Office, they have a special copyright office in the United States, as well as a patent office. We don't have a copyright office in Europe, before anyone asks. And the Copyright Office says, that's fine. But if the image, such as I did at the beginning here, is generated totally, freely, without any human input, except maybe a few prompts, then that is not entitled to copyright protection. And that, I think, is a case the same that's going to happen in Europe. You really have to have active involvement of a human in order to get copyright on the image. That has massive implications, because if you cannot copyright the image, then you cannot prevent other people from using it. So that image of the runner with the shoes, yes, I generated that, but I don't hold the copyright in that, because all I did was say, please draw up an image of a runner wearing a pair of running shoes. That's all I did. Not really very creative at all. And I really don't claim copyright in that. But if I'd sat down and started manipulating that image, if I'd sat down and started combining things to that image, then maybe I would have had copyright. And so it can be AI assisted. Patentability. Big discussions about what happens if an invention is created using an artificial intelligence system. No, the courts have quite clearly decided the inventor must be human. And there's several cases in the United States, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, around the world on that. There must be at least a human. It can be assisted. As the Germans have said in that case, the Dabus case, well, yes, you used a computer system. The computer system assisted you with the development of the invention, but it's important that you nominate the human as at least a co-inventor. I've talked very, very briefly about copyright works for AI training, that there have been copyrighted works. And there's one case in the United States, we've got a couple of minutes, yes. There's one case in the United States where exactly this has been done. It's been decided that the AI system used copyrighted information to basically replicate, generate a competitive work. The case is called Thomson Reuters case. So what they did is they copied summaries of legal decisions, used these summaries of legal decisions to train their own database, and then started producing a competitive product to the Thomson Reuters legal database, Westlaw it's called. And the court has quite clearly said, no, that is illegal. Why is that illegal? Because you're using the copyrighted summaries of the text, of the decisions, to train your own system, to produce a competitive system. That is not allowed. So it leaves a little bit of question mark open. What had they done it to not produce a competitive system? Would that have been allowed? We don't know. And I say that's the first court decision that I know of about this, at least in the United States. I'm talking about text. And we have similar issues with the New York Times. We have lots and lots of issues regarding films starting up. And even if the current administration in the United States actually wants to open up copyright law to allow a lot more training to go on with copyrighted materials, there's a real backlash already starting out of Hollywood there. The last thing I'll talk about IP is what about infringement of intellectual property? What happens if accidentally you infringe a patent through your AI system? Who's responsible? Well, you cannot probably sue the developer of the AI system because it was probably you that created the patent infringement, the copyright infringement, with the assistance of the generative AI system. But that's also an open issue that we're going to need to be thinking about. Now, just moving on, the last couple of slides here. There's some real criticisms and concerns that maybe it's over-regulation. Could it be stifling innovation in Europe? We've talked a little bit about that. The real complexity of enforcement, there's going to be really challenging issues about what is happening here. Even defining what an AI system was really, really difficult for the legislators. And there's really a need for further clarity, and there's going to be a lot more guidance implementing regulations that are coming through. Even now, they are being drafted. There's talking about high risk systems. They were banned from the 1st of February. But the rules and regulations that came out didn't even start or were not fully in place until about the second, I think it was the 2nd of February, the Monday afterwards that was happening. Really difficult to work to understand how AI is going to affect us, how the things that we need to obey. Basically, at the end of the day, it does require you to sit down, think about it, get your everything in place at present. So, just to conclude to our little talk today, before we go on to the questions, put everything in your the question box. I've got it up on the top right-hand corner for me with the question mark in there, and then we'll try and go through everything. The real issue is we're trying in Europe to get a so-called balanced AI regulation framework. We're trying to work out how do we encourage innovation, how do we defend the citizens' rights, working with the individual rights of the human being. That's going to be the real challenge in the future. The secondary thing is the AI Act is also supposed to start shaping global AI governance. Whether it succeeds or not, that's an open question. As I say, there are copies of this AI Act being created in other countries. This concept of the risk-based regulation, working out what should be banned, what is high risk, what is minimal risk, what is low risk, that concept seems to be adopted by many other countries. But of course, anybody who's worked in it will understand it's going to be a grey area. What is a banned system? What is a high risk system? What's the grey area in there? And we're going to need a lot more guidance from the courts, from the legislators, until we really understand what is happening there. So thanks very much indeed. I'm going to pass back to Michaela now to see whether we've got any questions and whether anybody's got any clarifications. I think we've got another 20 minutes or so. I can stay on for a few more minutes if we've got lots of questions. Michaela, pass back to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Indeed, there are a few questions. I'm going to answer the first one, which is rather more administrative. You're asking when you're going to be receiving the slides and the recording of today's webinar. For those of you who have connected a little later, I wanted to remind that slides are going to be sent as soon as possible, ideally this afternoon. I think I'm gonna make it, or otherwise at the latest it's going to be tomorrow morning. And then the first question was pointing out the dates. So I think it was slide 9 because it was asked at 11 o'clock and you were around there, Rob. Wait a second, I'm going to open up the slide. It was, I think it's referring to, sorry, wasn't slide 9. Where were we?
Yeah, so I think it's actually slide 11, by the way.
Yeah, slide 11, sorry.
No, not slide 11, maybe slide 10. Sorry, I can't. I've got a slightly different numbering here. Sorry, I think it was, yeah, sorry, it's the one that says high risk AI practices, which is, yes,
Yeah.
that one. Those were my understanding of the dates, but I will happily go back and check those and make certain that you get the dates correctly in place.
Yeah. And question number 3, is there a clause that will prevent companies from discriminating against people who are going to opt out?
No, there is not a clause that would prevent them from discriminating from people who opt out. That I think is there's obviously the general anti-discrimination clauses that you will need to take into place, but I think that it's a very, very good question there, and as far as I'm aware, there is nothing that could stop them. in practice, I think there could be challenges. Yep.
And the Lion case, what if we, a EC-funded project, develop a AI system for research purposes originally to be used by academic institutions and researchers, partly based on data and text that are mined, I think, from the internet, but
Yeah.
then at the end or after the project, certain services are monetized for valorization purposes and monetary reasons to be able to keep the project going, especially if there are also some industry players involved.
Well, that's a very, very good question, because I'm seeing that several times already. The answer is on that. As I say, we've got no real clear guidance on that, but as long as you have used the rules and regulations from the Text and Data Mining Directive, sorry, text and data mining, the text and data mining exception, you might be able to continue to commercialize this, or you might have to go back and retrain your database, making certain that you have licenses to the data that you use for training the database. If your researchers have basically not taken that into account whilst they're doing their initial training, because they say this is just purely a research database which I'm playing around with, then I think you will have real challenges in licensing it out. Probably one thing I didn't say, actually, which is important, is that we talked about copyright infringement, but there are systems now, companies are starting to allow you to use their texts for training purposes. So it is possible to go to certain companies and say, okay, I would like to be able to use your database to train my database, just like a normal license agreement allows you, copyright license agreement allows you to reproduce text. That concept has already started. So it may well be that you've developed something for research purposes only, realize it's really quite good, and then you make certain that you license in the information that you require. Whether that's economically possible or not, I have to leave that up to you. But it does mean that anybody moving from the research or into a valorization, commercialization stage will have to backfill the compliance issues there and make certain that they're okay.
Yeah, it's a wide, I mean, it's like a deeper and rooted problem, because it doesn't just happen, of course, with AI, but also if you build up a software with the licenses that allow you to research and use for research, then you realize it's quite good and you want to go commercial. You have to update those licenses in 90% of the cases because you only had access for non-commercial purposes, you know. So it's a very,
That's,
very interesting.
yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it's a real issue with open source licenses, as I think you know some
Yeah.
from your one of your webinars as well. So it's not just an issue for AI, but it does mean that when you're going for a research purpose to a to valorization, that you really do need to take these issues into account. And I think that's, you know, I won't, you know, we've had companies doing exactly that. We've seen companies where the young program come in and just sort of adopted the stand. You know, well, I did this in my bachelor's, master's thesis, and so why can't I do it in a commercial company? And really don't sit down and think about actually what you do in universities, what you do in research institutes. That's allowed, and you can infringe patents for research purposes, no problem. At least in Europe, not in the United States, by the way. Be very careful about that. And so, and you know, then we have suddenly when you start having to think about commercialization, you realize, that is not as easy. Our purpose in Europe is to allow people to do R&D as much as possible, but as long as that, when you start doing commercialization, you need to take into account third-party rights. You need to count patent, copyright, trademark rights. Sorry, going off ahead. It's not just an AI problem that we have here.
And number 5, rather than a question, a suggestion: should I use this prompt instead of directly writing to the AI? Additionally, those prompts contain private or sensitive data? Are there any regulation or guidelines in place to address this concern?
So I'm not. It's a rather than question. I'm not entirely certain. I understand. Should I use prompts instead of directly writing to the AI? I'm not.
Um, well, maybe we come back to the question later. I can
Yeah. Any
I can read.
information that you pass on to an AI system, it's quite clearly said that this is not private, and will not be considered to be private at all. It's we know certainly know DeepSeek has problems in the DeepSeek information. Um, there's serious concerns about the license associated with DeepSeek. If you're using ChatGPT, information is kept a lot more set private, but you should not use the public general generative AI systems for any confidential information, because the information will be transferred, often outside of Europe, um, may be stored, just like research queries are stored by Google, for example. I'm always telling people, seriously think if you're about to file a patent application, how much you want to ask Google whether it's a good idea or not. Um, and again, we have exactly the profession. We actually have this issue nowadays, that there are special systems being developed to allow patent attorneys to write patents with the help of with the AI, but the patent attorney organizations have all said you should not use ChatGPT, you should not use Gemini to support patent writing. Good.
Question number 6.
Yes, until a matter related to the illegal use of data is not settled in court, does the company apparently infringing law can still, that's always your risk, I'm afraid, is that if the use of the data now is illegal and it's not been decided in court, the court decides later that it was illegal, then it was illegal when you used it. So there's no right of continued use at all here. If you think you're okay, then, or you take the risk, that's up to you. But if you decide no risk, that is illegal, or we think that's illegal, we generate do it. Unfortunately, within AI Act, there are so many grey areas that there's going to have to be a risk-based approach yourself, whether you want to release an AI system, use an AI system in some context. Some areas are really quite clear, as I talked about medical devices, autonomous driving, but there can be other borderline issues where we're going to have to wait and find out. Mm-hmm. This is a really seven is a really interesting question. Yes, very, very interesting. So, a psychologist who's talking about whether a pupil having difficulties following a lecture is a challenge, perhaps akin to detecting sleepiness while driving, which is not prohibited. A teacher could get a flag that one or multiple students seem to have issues, leading her to rephrase or react by adopting a pedagogical strategy. Who can we ask? Well, there will be an opportunity for opinions, but at this stage, you'll need to ask somebody who actually understands the AI Act and to get some guidance around what is going on. And I think you've got a really very, very interesting point there, because although assessment of emotions is banned, and I think you're quite right about that. What about when you could actually turn it around for good? And I haven't gone into that, but there's a whole set of questions about that, which you'll probably need to ask an advisor who actually understands the AI Act and will give you that. But that is going to be a really interesting area. That's going to be one of the areas where I'm sure that we will start to see legal discussions about this. With the case of the pupil, what I would be looking at here is sort of making certain that the parents, for example, were happy with that sort of looking at that sort of idea. We've got some really interesting issues about something physiotherapy, how to monitor the physiotherapy of somebody. It's okay if they consent to it. If they don't consent to it, then it's probably not okay. So, looking at where we need to be, you'd probably need to be talking about getting the consent of the parents in order to do this. That would be the very minimum I would think of. But without knowing more details, I can't go into that in great deal. Slide 17, what about code? I'm sorry, I don't know what slide 17 is. What about code creation for a system invention? Yes. Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because as some of you know, Microsoft took over GitHub about you can certainly find it in the internet. You can even ask ChatGPT when Microsoft took over GitHub, and is being used. The code in GitHub is being used for Microsoft's Copilot program in order to able to help you provide code. And yes, some of that code is copyrighted. Much of it is open source. Much of it can be used for research and development purposes. Some of it can be used for commercial purposes, and there are court cases going on about that. How about genuine prompt engineering? It's a very demanding creative process which has nuances and requires certain expertise and knowledge of the model to use it efficiently. Creating proper prompts to generate a desirable image requires a very specific prompt and takes time to get right. Does this not entitle a person to the authorship of that prompt and consequently the image? I think the answer to the person who put question 10 is yes, that would probably be sufficient. With my very simple question, draw me a runner on a running device with a pair of sneakers around the place. It was a very simple one. That's probably not sufficient. Where the court case that we actually had in the United States was very much, they used composite images, they put everything together, and therefore did have human ingenuity in there. But I agree with for number 10, prompt engineering is probably copyrightable. I would like to ask for suggestions on how to deal with the challenge of not yet knowing how AI works, and the simultaneous demand of ethical principles. Maybe the person who's put question 11 could sort of explain what they mean. Are there any support devices for developers of AI systems for how to ensure that? Yes, there are a number of consultancy services coming up around, to find out very much if the lawyer or the consultants that you're working with actually understand AI systems. There's a number of people bringing who do actually understand it, who are sort of really getting into the detailed technical part of it. The issue that's going to be is finding somebody who's, from a technical understanding, understands what an AI system is, and also from the legal understanding. Thanks for the insight. Given the provisions of the AI Act, what do you think would be the top 2-3 steps of compliance of a tech startup being built in 2025? So top 3 steps. Step number 1, start a compliance program now. That would be top 2, start thinking about data sources. So that's what I would start. Your compliance program needs to be, I have a compliance program, because a lot of startups don't have one. Step 2 is, where am I getting the data from? I suppose step 3 is assessing the level of risk. How will the EU control the compliance with legal requirements of the AI Act that are used to develop? So there's going to be, within the Commission, there is going to be watchdogs that are controlling what is going on. You will be able to make complaints. You will be able to sue if necessary. So some of the big discussions about GDPR, and particularly the exchange of data between the United States and Europe, those decisions have been made because an individual, a guy by the name of Max Schrems in Austria, has actually filed suit against, I think it was the Irish Data Protection Board, who regulate Facebook. I think it was Facebook or something. I can't remember exactly the details. And it was an individual. Obviously, they are supported by organizations that are doing this. But that will be one of the main ways that case law is obtained, together with complaints to the EU. How will the EU regulate the deployment of autonomous systems in high-risk applications such as maritime navigation and defense? And what compliance challenges do companies face when integrating AI-driven autonomy under these new regulations. So I think the point about it is we need to actually understand the risk level, maritime navigation. So my dad actually was the captain of a ship, so I know quite a lot about maritime navigation. And then sitting down there and really sitting there and thinking, what are the risks that are involved? What is the autonomy that's involved? What do we put in place to ensure that the mistakes do not happen? Let us take the example of, some of you may know that there was a collision off the English coast last week, where a ship basically went into another ship. You would maybe that was driven. Well, it was simple. If you look at the coast, it was being driven directly downhill. You need to make certain you have avoidance mechanisms in there, and you need to document everything. So I'm sorry, 15 I'm not seeing. How would it, so that's navigation defense. Many thanks. I'm not convinced you cannot oppose to the use of the instance without your consent. Yeah, I agree with you. You can oppose it. The point I said is it's already being used. I can tell you that. I think it's Clearview, if I remember rightly, is the name of the company that's doing it. Certainly provide the name if anyone wants to know. This is a clear data breach. I totally agree. You need the consent. They will do all the best to remove the image. Yes, I totally agree. The issue that we do have, it's being done already. That's the fact. The images that you've put up on Facebook, the images that you've put up on LinkedIn, Twitter, or what have you, are already being used illegally. I would agree with you that's illegal, but it's a fact that they've already been used. How do you control AI art is harming? How do you control that AI is harming an AI app for good? I mean, is it like prohibiting you can be used? I'm not sure that I understand question 17. Is this not a retroactive opt-out, as consent should be explicit and prior to processing? I agree that the consent has to be.
Also, maybe it was connected to a certain. They were connected to a certain slide, so perhaps it's hard now to
Right. Yeah.
retrieve.
Can a yeah. Is a retroactive opt-out as consent should be explicit and prior? Yes. The point about it is I keep on emphasizing the challenge that we have is a lot of what is prohibited in the European AI Act quite simply has already been done. Let's be honest about it. That's one of the arguments that the American government is making. Well, the horse is already bolted, so why are you now trying to close the stable door, if you understand that metaphor? Whereas what we're trying to do within Europe is really to say, okay, let's control it in the future, and maybe the mistakes of the past we can sort of try and heal to a certain extent. Can a series of prompts be patentable? Probably not patentable. Maybe the product might be patentable, but certainly not the prompts. The prompts could be protected by copyright. Sorry, Mikhail, something I'm missing the next question. I can not seeing it. Okay.
20.
Would the development, yeah, 20. Would the development of AI risk management plan mandatory for certain industries? Yes, it is. Quite clearly, with high risk, you will need to have a risk management plan in place. What authorities could potentially monitor the implementation of these plans? Well, like we have at present, it's going to be the European, various European agencies, the national agencies are going to be monitoring it, but also a lot of it is when something problem happens, you will be required to show the plans that you have in place. Thanks for presentation. We work within energy and electric markets. Could we find more information about the definitions of the digital spine and generative AI? Currently, much of what we have comes from the law. People are writing articles about it, which you would probably find. This is such a dynamic process. On my slides, you'll find there's a reference to my Substack, which I write about a few bits and pieces that sort of come into my field of things. So I did something about educational within the educational sphere, and quite frankly, at this stage, a lot of it is up in the air. We're trying to really understand how the AI Act should be. It's a new technology. It's got to be regulated. We know it's got to be regulated, but we don't really know how to regulate it. And we've done our best, and we'll just have to continue to wait. So with energy and electricity markets, what I would be doing is I would be thinking about the risks that are associated with it. I would be looking at the information, the data that you get in. So with the networks, for example, if you're talking about the networks, the power, what is happening, and then think about what happens if you get surges. How do you detect surges? What's the implication? What would happen if, for example, an AI system made a decision which led to a surge, which then led to a collapse of a network? How would you avoid that? How do you make certain you avoid that? That's just totally off the top of my head. Most people use AI-driven tools for note-taking, AI-generated avatars, sometimes without obtaining consent. Well, I can tell you officially, you do need to consent. I would agree that consent be standard practice, or is integration of AI tools in meetings becoming an accepted norm? Yes, I agree, it's possibly becoming an accepted norm, but you do need to tell people that you are doing that. This is labeling, telling people this is what you're doing, and those people have to either accept it or withdraw from the meeting. Prompts is an actual code input with the data, and the whole problem you can paste directly. Yes, I'm 23, question 23. Well, I mean prompts, actual code input with the data. And I'm sorry, I still don't understand your question. I'll just move on for the sake of time. Is there anything in the AI and sustainability of operations with respect to sustainable development goals of the EU? Yes, there are a few bits and pieces about that. There's some oblique references, I think, to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of that's in there that we talk about sustainability. Obviously, energy costs is one of our real problems. Let's go. Question 11.
That was the question 11 that is referring to. Right.
Yeah.
I would like to ask some suggestion.
Want to use AI, but he doesn't know how to use it. But he has to simultaneously. Yes, we do not know what we have to know, and I think that's I hate to say it. I think it's a problem. Without the specifics, I can't really go into that question. But you're absolutely right. We do not know. For somebody talked about there are the known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and then we have the unknown unknowns. And that's exactly the same. We need to actually understand the issue. And sometimes it's going to be at this stage, a lawyer or consultant would simply tell you, we just don't know at this stage. Going back to our pedagogical thing that the psychologist put into place, I would have to look in detail into the law and also the implementing regulations to even try and get there. But probably nobody has come up with that use case yet. And so you're going to have to adapt it. You're going to have to think about it and work out how to move forward. If an AI prompt is profit companies asking its users about their daily habits with the only purpose to helping each one of them individually input without this for training purpose or giving this information, then is the A a minimal or no risk situation? The same as A, but those. I'm terribly sorry. That's quite a complicated question, and you need to think about the risk level that you're there. And you
We
need to
can
actually
also receive it at the helpline. Potentially,
yes.
they've got more time to think about it and also to answer later on.
I'm sorry. I
The
just
last
really
two
cannot.
questions we have.
Yes. Would AI ethical bring more attention for the EU and set regulation by law? When applying for what should be aware for using AI to development technology? Would AI bring more attention? Yes. So I mean, just like we have ethical research principles that you need to apply when you're looking for an EU grant. You're going to need to bring the ethical principles for AI. Not aware that the Commission has started thinking about that or adding anything into their the research guidelines or the ethical research principles at all. But it's certainly something if you wanted to put it into your grant into your grant proposal would certainly, I think, help you with the reviewers. Nando is still empty. Nando is still empty for
Maybe
something.
it's
I'm afraid I don't understand.
I don't know what it means.
I think. Yes, Nando's is a very nice, well, not very nice British restaurant. So Nando's still empty in case of high risk and notify is mandatory. Okay. Yes, I think the point about it is with medical device regulations, these are high risk, and there is, and there's going to be there will be there is notified body designation, of course, for medical devices. So I'm not entirely certain what the questioner is asking there, I'm afraid. Good. Sorry that I can't. Sorry.
It was the last one. That's what
that was the last question. So thanks very much indeed. I'm sorry I can't go into some of these details with some quite complicated issues there. As I said, Michael pointed out that the IPR Helpdesk is available for many of these questions. They can't go into completely legal details, but they can help you in point you in the right direction, I think is as Michael said when at the beginning of this conversation. Good. Pass back to you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much once again, Rob, for the very interesting presentation. Thank you very much, Alina, for your introduction and also for the cooperation in the organization. It's been a real pleasure for the European IP Helpdesk to have the chance to spend this hour and a half with you. And in the follow-up email, you're also going to be receiving when we are going to meet Robert Harrison next, and also the date of our next appointment together with the Horizon Results Platform, publishing versus patenting. So all the information is going to be there as soon as possible. Thank you very much once again. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks very much indeed, Michael.
Thank you very much. See you.
Ali, lovely to see you again. Bye-bye.